Hey, John with PadPrinters.com. I'm going to talk today about why ink cups leak. So there's a variety of reasons having to do with the ink cups themselves, the doctor ring and O-ring, this little cap that goes on top of the ink cup, your different cliche holders or cliche supports, your cliches, and finally the pressure towers, of which there are two different types on TOSH machines. So let's talk first about the ink cup. So here's an ink cup for a 90mm that is assembled. You have the cap in here, you have the ceramic doctor ring installed, and beneath that is an O-ring like this. So first of all, it's important that the O-ring is clean and doesn't have any breaks in it, and it's inside the slot on the ink cup, as you can see here. You need to make sure that when you install your doctor ring, you're installing it the correct way, because there's a flat surface and there's a sharp surface. We've actually had people that called with problems doctoring, and they had their ink doctor ring on upside down, so sharp side goes toward the plate. The surface of the ceramic ring, or the sharp edge here, when they're new, is just going to be a couple of thousandths. And as it wears, it's going to get down to about 10 thousandths here, or a quarter of a millimeter. So once you get to this sharp edge here being a quarter of a millimeter, 10 thousandths, it's time to replace the ceramic ring. It's also important that you use enough ink in your cup. This is one of the main reasons why ink cups leak, believe it or not, is people aren't using enough ink because they're trying to get away with just putting maybe 20 or 30 grams in a 90mm cup to do a short run. It doesn't work. You need to have any TOSH ink cup about 75% of the way full. On this 90mm cup for the Micro 90, that means that it needs to be full to the, basically to the edge of this little ridge right here, about 75% of the way. The reason is because ink acts like a lubricant, and without enough lubricant, it doesn't want to efficiently doctor the surface of the cliche. You also have the necessity of, especially if you're using two-component inks, you need to remove the ceramic doctor ring after each shift and thoroughly clean the ring and the O-ring and the channel that the O-ring goes in. The reason is because if you leave that in there and that ink hardens or dries, even with single-component ink with no hardener, if you get enough ink in there and it's dry, the doctor ring itself can't actually float on the body of the cup. It's difficult to see here because I'm doing this with one hand, but once this is installed on the ink cup, this doctor ring floats a little bit. And what I mean by floating is that when the cup is actually moving on the surface of the cliche, the doctor ring is in contact with the surface of the cliche. The inertial forces in the cup, when it changes direction, make it kind of want to, for lack of a better term, kind of pop a little wheelie in each direction, and that causes some leaking. So if this can't float, it can't seal. So it's important to clean your cups thoroughly. And finally, there's this little hole in the top of the ink cup, which is made for this cap. This cap is a vent cap, and it can actually be removed to allow gases that build up inside the cup during production runs to escape. This happens especially when you're using two-component inks. So a lot of people will install the ink cup in the machine and then remove the cap and run production without the cap, being sure to replace it, obviously, before they turn the cup over to remove it and dump the ink out. If you can also use this and remove it if you want to add thinner with a little plastic pipette. So that's about ink cups, doctor rings, and O-rings. And you have cliche supports. There's a couple of kinds. This is the non-magnetic cliche holder for the Micro 90. This has a pin assembly system here I'll talk about more in a second, and this is an integrated non-magnetic cliche holder. The difference is, you'll notice this is just an aluminum plate, 10mm thick, two magnets here in the corners. It's a non-magnetic plate because there aren't any magnets where the ink cup goes. You don't want magnets where the ink cup goes because the ink cup has magnets and they would repel each other. So with the non-magnetic cliche holder and this pin assembly, it's important that these pins themselves be at or below the surface of the cliche here. And this one is a little below. I've got it pushed down in there actually, and this one is glued in because I prefer to glue them in rather than use the little caps, stainless steel caps that fit over this, and screws. When I put my cliches on here, number one, I want to make sure that these are completely clean and my cliche is completely clean, because any debris in between can cause a high spot, which once it's doctored with a ceramic ring, the ceramic ring can shave that material off, and then you've destroyed your plate. So when putting them on the first time, I use the round hole first in this corner. Press it on and then rotate over to the elongated pin and press it on there. And you should notice when you have a new cliche that once you do this the first time, you're probably going to have a little bit of polymer that snaps out of the hole on the first try. And that's normal. You want it to fit nice and tight, and you want it to be flat. So if your cliche is not seating correctly, let us know. They're all punched and everything should be correct, but if you can't get them on the pins for some reason, let us know. Then you'll notice that this one is nice and flat on here. And the reason why you want to have those pins down here at or below the surface of the cliche is that if they're too high, the cliche actually kind of bumps up onto the surface of the pin, and then when the cup gets to the front positions, you can see about where the edge of the cup is here and here. The cups will tend to leak here because the pins are high or because the pins are low. When they're low, especially if you're using the caps with the screws that go over the top here, if the pin is too far below the surface and you over tighten those caps with the screws, you're actually bowing the cliche up and then down into the hole, and you get the same leaks here and here. So if you're seeing a leak here and here, or one place or the other or both, it's probably on a non-magnetic cliche holder because the pins underneath here that I showed you are too high, or if you're using the caps, you're over tightening them. You only need to finger tighten the little caps that go over top here. In the integrated cliche holder, it's integrated because it is part of a dovetail assembly that gives you the X, Y, and rotational adjustment. These pins are pressed in and the magnets are in the corners, so you shouldn't have any issue there. Again, just make sure that you're using the cliches, starting with the round hole, going over to the long hole, and make sure they're flat and clean. You should be good. And finally, pressure towers. There's two different types on TOSH machines. One, this is the new one that just has this detent. There's an upper magnet, lower magnet for position, and when you bring it down all the way to the bottom, it seats in the ink cup, and it should be flat up here on the top. On both of these, this is the old style with a separate pressure pin that comes out when you release the 6mm set screw here, and this one actually has some adjustment to it. On both of these, you'll notice there's a little nylon bushing, and you want to make sure that those bushings haven't gone missing. If they have, call us to get a replacement. That helps take up some of the inside dimension on the ink cup where the pin goes in down here. So again, if these guys are missing, that could be causing some problems because your cup again is kind of popping a wheelie when it changes direction. You want to make sure obviously that the pin is all the way down. As I mentioned with this integrated guy, you shouldn't see any space up here on top where you have that snap ring. And then here, when you're installing, we typically only use these old style holders on machines that have thick steel cliches or sometimes thin steel cliches. The reason is because this is from before we had magnets in the ink cups, and we actually had to use this pressure adjustment to increase the downforce to get the ink cups to seal on the surface of the cliches. So now that we're having magnetic ink cups in this new integrated tower, you really don't need to have this unless you have thin steel or thick steel plates. And when I'm using these on either thick or thin steel, excuse my finger there, I want to make sure that once I install this and this goes into the cup, when I start doctoring, I have 4 or 5 threads showing on this adjustment. Again, the magnet should be doing the work, so you really shouldn't need to use this downforce adjustment except when plates are brand new and you're kind of wearing in with a doctoring to a new cliche for a thick steel plate, for example. So those are some of the reasons why ink cups leak on TOSH machines. I have all of this written up in a PDF as well, so if you like the video and you want to see all this stuff in writing with some pictures, let me know. This is John with padprinters.com. Thanks.